So I
So
don't see your flower. There you are, with your little
thanks,
beard.
thanks so much for that like, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's been quite a difficult journey that you've had. Do you think that experience that you had, is there a common experience in the bush for people in the way that you used alcohol and the way that people in the bush also use alcohol?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I would describe country people as we're all pretty similar, I reckon, in the sense that we're pretty stoic. We have a pretty can-do attitude, and we're pretty tough, actually, in lots of ways. And I often describe that as being a blessing and a curse because we have been, I guess, perhaps indoctrinated to be tough and harden up, and you don't worry about stuff like that, and you just get up and you show up and you keep going no matter what. Um, as a consequence, we're perhaps not as good at describing how we're feeling or how we're traveling as some of our mates might be. And we can tend to grog to not drown our feelings. Well, yeah, some of us do, but yeah, we just, I don't know, we use alcohol to to escape, to unwind, to commiserate, to celebrate. Um, and it's, I think it would be fair that a lot of us have fallen into the trap of laughing things off and having a beer rather than perhaps working through things when they need to be worked through in a probably slightly more healthy manner. I know I don't speak on behalf of everyone when I say that, but I think it would be a fair comment to say it's a tendency of bushies to to drink it rather than think it, perhaps, maybe. Yeah, hard to explain. It's something. It's a good question, Chris. Yeah, because it's kind of ingrained in us, but to get it out in words and to say it is hard to. And I never ever want to condemn or sound like it's a judgment, because it's not. Because country people are who I live for and who I exist for. But if we had one flaw, I think it would be that we can be so stoic that we forget how to be vulnerable.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
definitely. Uh,
Yeah.
when you began sober in the country and you started having these conversations with people, what was the initial reaction or reception to those that are close to you?
Oh, it was very profoundly positive very quickly. And as you would know, when I kicked off this chat 5 years ago in early sobriety, all I was just a volunteer with a laptop, just kind of, I don't know, bumbling my way through, knowing that I wanted to do something positive. So I certainly didn't have the reach or the voice that I have now. So it was very raw and very um, vulnerable. And and the reason it's grown so quickly is because the response was massive and immediate. And it began like this and it just exponentially grew. But it was like, oh my God, thank you, Shanna, for having this chat. Thank you for going first. Because guess what? Me too. Me too. Um, and the overwhelming response I've always had through Sober in a Country on any of our social media, whether it's on our public page or in our private closed group, is thank God someone's doing this and saying this, because it had to be said and it has to be pursued. And but there is an overriding sense of fear that still exists in this space, which is, I wish I could say what you're saying, but I'm too scared of what the kickback would be. So yeah, we're walking a pretty perilous, careful line here with this advocacy and with the charity, which is, and it's very much like what you already know from 10 years at the helm of Hello Sunday Morning. You never ever want to hang shit on your mates who are on the beers. That's not what it's about. But it's about rather recognizing the fact that a few of our mates aren't doing so well in that space. So yeah, but it's mostly been really, really positive, like really positive. Yeah.
Mhm. How have you? I mean, this thing that the world is now going through around isolation, and I mean, being isolated is something that's very natural to people that live in regional and remote areas.
Mm.
Do you? What are your thoughts on the relationship between isolation and perhaps a dependence on alcohol to cope with that?
Yeah, it's funny, for us, it's almost business as usual. This is our normal.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, Sober in the Country is kind of it's our time to shine, because this is what we do. This is what we've had to learn, how to handle drinking in isolation. That is exactly what our life is. So this virus has probably highlighted to the world the entire purpose of our plight and this charity, which is to say, guys, I want you to imagine for one moment how hard it is to overcome isolation and drinking with nothing there except yourself and the internet, because that's all we've got, most of us. So it's kind of weird. It's revealed our superpowers as people in some ways, without that meaning to sound arrogant, but it's kind of what we've always had to deal with. What we know is that addiction and isolation go hand in hand, which is why it's always been extra scary for me as a person trying to raise this issue in the bush. It's such a dreadful thing, Chris, to know how many of your mates rurally, because people in the rural sector have been, in some cases, going through hell on earth for up to a decade, whether it's drought or bushfires, or drought and bushfires, then drought and bushfires, and now COVID. I mean, it is just relentless. It is relentless what some of our mates have been putting up with for a very, very long time. And off the record, I'm hearing again and again from our friends that alcohol is almost the only thing they feel like they can do to switch off, to wind down, to turn off, to cope, to stay sane. And we know from a you and I know that that's not how you do it and you cope. It's not healthy, but it's easy to say that, but it's much harder to get that message through to people who have literally got nowhere else to turn. It's such an incredibly complex, tragic thing to witness and see your mates going down that rabbit hole, because that was me. Like, my story is based on that. It's like, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to turn to, but alcohol was always there. Yeah, mate. So it's a very real thing. Isolation and addiction, they walk hand in hand, and it's a very serious problem, which we've been dealing with, like I said, forever and ever and ever. So, yeah, and it's a traditional thing that bush people will, they'd probably rather sit on their veranda and have 6 beers and ring a mate and have a D&M, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
What
problem as old as time.
What have you seen within your community, and even perhaps in your own life, as some of the common patterns of people that have either managed to create a healthier relationship with alcohol, or to maintain sobriety in dealing with isolation, and not having alcohol there as the tool to deal with it? What have you seen as been some of the common patterns of success with yourself and people around you?
Yeah, radical shifts in our lifestyle, actually. So I can think of a handful of people right now who kind of got behind me from day one and said, well, holy cow, if Roland's, sorry, that's my maiden name, but if Roland's can get off the booze, I can. And a few of my guy mates actually blew my mind and decided they would throw themselves a challenge to get off the beers, because they had a beer gut, or they were feeling a bit sluggish, and their wives were giving them a hard time for looking a bit average or whatever. And I watched a few of my guy mates transform themselves completely. And what they did was they stopped drinking during the week, and they replaced beer o'clock with gym o'clock, for example. They started having a look at their own health and their own patterns, and they just made a decision that they wanted to give it a try. And what was really, really awesome was to see that, and as you would know, like attracts like. So, the guy that was leading the charge in his group and changing the pattern from getting on the booze to going to the gym, a couple of his mates would come with him. And suddenly there was a group that were together who felt like they could do it as a team. So it was kind of like creating a healthier culture within a subculture that was primarily about grog. And when one bloke stood up and said, nah, fellas, I'm off the grog for the moment, another guy went, oh, well, if he's doing it, I might do that too. So there's kind of like a really beautiful ripple effect started happening. And that has definitely grown. And that's why with our charity, you know, one of our little taglines has become, oh, look, it's okay to say no. You know, we just want our mates to know if they don't say yes to a beer, it doesn't make them the worst bloke in the world. It's okay. And so it was kind of like a ripple effect of change. Yeah, so putting their health first, putting their family first, just little steps, little changes. And oh my gosh, there's nothing as awesome as seeing one of your mates suddenly rocking up, you know, on a Saturday at the footy looking buff and fit and sparkling, you know, and that was a testimony that was very powerful within itself. So that's probably one of the easiest, most obvious changes, I reckon, in those who could give it up easily. Obviously, it's a very different scenario for someone in active alcoholism, but yeah, for an average bloke to make those changes, very, very powerful. Awesome stuff.
And a big part of your work is around advocacy, and you're kind of always out there on Twitter, like really fighting the good fight around perhaps larger systematic or culture change. What do you know, what's your objective with that kind of work? What do you think Australian society more broadly should do around our drinking culture that goes beyond individual change?
Yeah, it's funny. That's been a bit of an accidental process with me. What I've realized is my voice is a lot bigger than just the bush. I never intended that to be a thing, but turns out, I guess, being an ex-writer and a public speaker, it was a natural progression that my advocacy would get, I guess, much more far-reaching than just the country. And also, given the fact that I'm independent and not bound by anyone, I can speak quite freely. So I was like, oh God, that's actually quite a lot of influence I can use and I need to do this very carefully. So I've kind of, and particularly with COVID, I have felt a really heavy, not heavy, a very serious obligation to fight the good fight, because there's few people that can do that without it coming back on them heavily as either an employee or bound by legislation or whatever, whereas I'm still very much a free agent. And I feel so compelled, Chris, to just use my words and use that raw truth that I value so deeply, to just speak the truth and say, Australia, what are we doing? Like, what's going on here? Yeah, as a broader cultural thing, I'm not sure about you, but it seems that COVID-19 has really shone a spotlight on our national, not just our rural, but our national obsession and worship of booze. And there's some really frightening truths being thrown right into the public eye here that can't even be ignored anymore. And it's sort of, it has in a way fast-tracked what's been a very deliberate, careful, respectful, steady advocacy for me. And I've kind of lifted it a few notches because there's some really bloody scary stuff happening as we go into, is it week 3 of this pandemic? Yeah, Chris, so honestly, I mean, really effectively, I'm still just basically a volunteer. Um, my heart is so very much about doing whatever I can for the greater good with whatever voice this body possesses. And I think that can be very powerful at times, because there are very few recovered alcoholics who are willing or prepared to throw themselves under the bus and reveal their own horrendous flaws and imperfections nationally over and over. But I do that because I believe lived experience right now in this time and in this space, with what this virus is revealing about Australia and grog, I could not be silent if my life depended on it, because I'm seeing the truth unfolding on a daily basis. I'm seeing people within our group relapsing because there has been a huge influx of alcohol related memes and jokes and social media, and let's cope with COVID-19 by getting tanked at midday or 1 o'clock and drinking all day every day. And again, we don't demonize our mates who can responsibly drink, but there's been a correlating spike, not just in alcohol sales and consumption, but in all of that sort of spin on let's cope by drinking. And that's having a correlating, really dramatic and profound effect on people who are in trouble. And when you see that day in and day out, and you hear from people day in, day out that um, they're feeling like they're in such a constant, inescapable danger zone because they can't get away from it. It's like, oh, gee whiz. Okay, so how do we continue to try and gently encourage our mates, guys? If you can, you just maybe think before you tweet, because while it might be fun and games for you, someone over here, their life is actually on the line, and it's a heartbreaking thing to know that side of it. So I kind of do the best I can, like I said, with this very imperfect human that I am, to, I don't know, just bring the two together and say, can we maybe just look after each other now, urgently, and from a national perspective, you know, advocating further and wider, because it's a truly, truly, really big problem where, you know, there is an impending crisis within a crisis coming. And I don't know, mate, I just feel obliged to be part of maybe making that less of a crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
how do you personally cope with things that make you anxious now? Like now, alcohol's on the table, but
Great.
surely you still have
Yeah.
points of stress and
Yeah.
fear and frustration. What are your go-to tactics
Oh,
now?
absolutely. Yeah. Well, mate, isn't it funny? Like three three weeks ago, I was in Sydney at the Opera House and about to launch on a year of traveling Australia. So 6 years of work of me being in the trenches without a cent of income, planning, preparing, and setting myself up, went up in smoke in 3 days.
Yeah.
So easily, one of the hardest things I've ever endured in my sobriety happened because of COVID-19. So yeah, it's a good question. And what I will say is that, so it's really funny. I was in Sydney ready to travel the world and bloody, you know, realize all my dreams and my wish, which was to travel and share this positive message. And I'd been invited all over Australia to speak at loads of rural and national functions, and it was all sitting there. And then it was gone in a matter of days. And I came home and I literally just said to my beautiful husband, Tim, I said, mate, just FYI, I'll be heading to the room and you may not see me for about a week because I don't even know how to, I'm done. I'm devastated. And I went and I didn't lock myself, but I metaphorically locked down. And I spent a week in and out of, I was really upset, mate. I cried and cried and cried. I cried like a baby. Um, and I just said to Tim, and he would poke his head in the door and say, sweetie, are you okay? And I'm like, I will be, I'm fine. But if I don't grieve and feel these feelings, it could be ugly. So I just I got to cop it. I've got to feel it. I've got to process it. I've got to work through it. And that was something I learned in sobriety when I overcame my alcoholism, was instead of drinking my feelings, I have to feel them.
Mm.
And holy shit, that is a painful process, Mr. Rain, let me tell you. And I'm ever so grateful that I learned that years ago, and I implemented that through this COVID crisis. I went, all right, big girl, this is going to hurt like buggery, but you're going to have to cop it and feel it. And so I did, and I gave myself permission. Being the CEO, I gave myself a week of mental health time. And mate, I just threw myself down on the couch like a toddler and I cried it out and went, this sucks. This really sucks. But in the back of my mind, the whole way through, I knew that if I kept it very simple, I would be okay. And if I'm nothing if not very resilient and very hard to kill, as I've figured out. So I gave myself that period of time. And one day, Timbo, this is before he'd had to shift his office to come and work from home. He came home to find me knee deep in cleaning products, doing the windows, and the washing was on the line, and went, oh, welcome back, babe. And I said, yep, I've come through it. And I said, I told you I'd be okay, but I gave myself permission to feel like crap, because I did. So yeah, and then it took about another week to equalize from that. And then I sat down and went, rightio, Shanna, you're a survivor. You've been through so much worse. What are the positives in here? And then it occurred to me, and here's the flip side of having, I guess, learned how to deal with trauma and stress. You dig deep and you find the silver lining. And I dug deep and I was like, my God, we are by default going to emerge as validated in the seriousness of this chat, because suddenly the whole world is petrified about how they're going to cope without face-to-face interaction. That is our normal. This is where we can step up and say, righto, it can be done. There are ways to do this. It really validated the urgency of why people without face-to-face support deserve to have the best technology at their fingertips. And I was like, whoa, everything I've been saying for 5 years is being validated because of this rotten virus. Okay, there are positives, let's go. And I just got up and I went to work, and now I've, as I said in a blog recently, I've come out swinging. I'm ready for round 578,022 and off we go again, you know.
In this series of interviews I've been doing, I mean, that's a really common experience that people that I've spoken with have shared, which is, as I guess, being able to have the courage to deal with what's uncomfortable and give it as much time as is necessary. And it's a really powerful skill and strategy to be able to do that, and also to value yourself to a point that you actually do that rather than keep pushing things down.
Yeah.
What is your hope after COVID? If we were to see larger culture change, and in particular in the bush, but perhaps more broadly around the way we use alcohol, what would you like to see? What's your one wish for Australians and perhaps people globally around the way we use alcohol post-COVID?
Oh, look, the Mary Poppins in me would just really love, Chris, to see the elephant in the room being addressed. You can't change something as mammoth as the alcohol culture overnight, and you'd be mad to even think you could. But I would love to think that we will learn from this as a nation and globally, because I think that this period of time is going to really force us into some very uncomfortable positions, but also incredible learning moments, as trendy people would say. These are learning moments. I would love to see the leadership of this country go, guys, it's pretty obvious we're not doing it right when it comes to alcohol. What can we change? What can we shift? I would love to see a unified response and approach from amazing people with lived experience like yourself, like us, like all of the many people on the front lines. Collaboration, cohesive, people-focused change and solutions. I'd love to see in Australia, and I think I said that I can't remember if I said it on Australian Story, but my wish and my dream is in Australia in which it's just totally okay when someone says no thanks for a drink. I just would love to see our national identity not utterly intrinsically connected to booze. Imagine if Australians were revered and admired and respected because they were healthy and active, and valued those things. Anyway, I know that's a massive leap, but I just get sick of seeing Australia in the national media for the wrong reasons. So yeah, I don't know. I dream of us leading a charge where it's okay to be healthy. It's okay not to be the drunkest person in the globe always. Let's not wear it as a national badge of honor. Let's make it a sometimes thing. Yeah, I don't know, mate. Just a better positive image overall, I reckon, would be amazing. But it's going to take a lot of collaboration, a lot of work. Yeah.
Well, Shanna, I think that's a really powerful, great message and vision. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And
thanks, Chris.
All the best in the rest of COVID.
Yeah, mate, you too. Gosh, I tell you what, the best thing about being in the bush is you've got acres and acres of land to go run around and exercise in. So we're very, very fortunate. Yay.
Thanks, Shanna.
See you.